We're going to start this meeting, this study session at 4:35 p.m. If we could please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mayor Pro Tem Crosby will lead us today.
Put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Mr. Domer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Kasha-Fagita.
Here, sir.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Lau.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Crosby.
Here.
Mayor Hepburn.
Present.
And Mr. Mayor, just to announce, so for this special session, we are taping it for later broadcast, so it's not going out live right now, but LVTV is here and taping it. It will be on our YouTube channel for everybody to see after tonight.
Beautiful. Thank you. We have a study session for the following 2023-24 budget and the 5-year capital improvement plan. Mr. Domer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the study session as you announced. What I do is like to bring up our Director of Finance, Christy Lopez. She will introduce her team and then they'll start on the presentation.
Good evening, Director Lopez. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you
And
very
your
much.
team.
Yes. Good evening, afternoon. I appreciate being able to come and present this to you. I will let them introduce themselves throughout, but right now we're going to go ahead and start with the overview of the 23-24 budget. So first off, we do have just a review of the budget process, and Isabella is actually going to go ahead and take that. So I'm going to have her come up.
Hi, I'm Isabella. I'm one of the accountants. So the budget process is over a span of 5 months and begins in February. This is a month where we start planning and send out information to the departments. Then in March, Finance begins collecting data from the departments, such as payroll projections and expenditure and revenue estimates. In April is when we begin compiling the data, and we have our department meetings with the city manager. We also begin preparing our presentation for today's study session. So here we are in May at the budget study session. This is a high-level overview to get feedback from council to make sure we are on the right track. Throughout this month, we will also have the CIP and Measure LV review. And on May 22nd, we will have the budget book ready for council to review. June is the final month in the budget process. June 5th, that study session will be for departments to present their budgets. And June 19th is the adoption of the budget. And that concludes the budget process, and I will now hand it back to Christy to go over the 5-year forecast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella. That was her first time presenting to council, so good job. You did amazing. So as Isabella said, I'm going to go over the 5-year financial forecast. This is actually the first time that the city has done a 5-year financial forecast. And so we put this together, and I'm sure that as we go along, we will see that we need to tweak things, but as of right now, this presents an estimated information, which is based on past, current, and projected financial conditions. And so a financial forecast evaluates current and future fiscal conditions to guide policy and program decisions. We use a hybrid model when forecasting. An effective forecast allows for improved decision-making in maintaining fiscal discipline and delivering essential community services. So we do a conservative forecast which estimates revenues at a worst-case scenario and builds in a layer of contingencies for expenditures. We do have some considerations when we're looking at our forecasting. We use consultants for our top 3 revenue sources, which is property sales and utility users tax. And we use historical data and consult with department heads that have insight into activities within their area of expertise. So this is our revenue forecast. And on the left-hand side, let's see if this works. There you go. So on the left-hand side, you have your actuals, and then you have projected on the right-hand side. So in fiscal year 2023, we are estimating that we are going to come in at 45.5 million. And for 23-24, we are estimating that we are going to have 48.2 million. So we are looking at a 4% revenue growth for the average of 5 years. Taxes make up about 56% of all of our revenues. And included with our transfers is 2.4 million for fiscal year 22-23, which comes from Measure LV. Now I will give it to Jesus to give you a deeper, oh yes, of course.
On there, what is that big blue on the 21, 22? Is it small everywhere else?
Correct, which if this guy worked. That is actually, oops, that is the property sale. So that is Amherst, the $5 million property sale. Yes, of course, no problem. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to Jesus, and he's going to give you more of a detailed look into our revenues.
Thank you, Christy. I am Jesus. I'm another one of the accountants. And before you, I have presented property tax trends. In the green, we see 4 years of actuals, and in the orange, we see our projected property tax growth. Overall, we are estimating a slow but steady growth in property taxes. We really wanted to highlight this section because property tax accounts for over 60% of all taxes received by the city. Again, as I said earlier, we're expecting steady growth, and a big part of that is due to we're expecting this decline in home sales and overall flattening of median home prices. Now to go into a little more detail over property taxes. On the left-hand side, you see a comparison of how the city of Laverne compares to the overall county averages for increases in assessed values of homes. In fiscal year 2021 and 21-22, the city outpaced the county by far, whereas in 22-23, we're seeing that begin to match, and a big part of that is sort of resulting in, or sort of attributing to the slow growth in property taxes. And on the right-hand side, for our residents, when our residents pay their property taxes, 18%, as shown in that orange slice, comes back to the city. Those funds are used to pay for general city services such as police, fire, community services. Moving on to sales tax. Again, actuals in green and projected in the orange. Sales tax is our second largest revenue source in terms of taxes. We are expecting a very slow growth with this also. As you can see in 1920 and 2021, those property taxes decreased mainly due to the pandemic, and as restrictions started to lessen, we saw a big increase. However, that is expected to flatten out, and a big part of that is also just to the overall economic slowing down of the economy, and it's expected that unemployment rates will rise in California. Again, going more into detail about sales tax, this exercise shows for every $100 that residents pay, they're paying $10.25 in sales tax. We have a 10.25 sales tax rate in Laverne. And this is broken down into 6% going to the state, mainly to cover the California General Fund. 2.5 is going to LA County, mainly due to voter-approved measures. And 1.75 is staying in Laverne. Out of the entire 10.25 sales tax, only 1.75 is coming to Laverne, and 0.75 is due entirely to Measure Z or Measure LV. We hope that residents continue to shop in Laverne and help our sales tax increase. With that, I'll pass it on to Christy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesus. Also his first time presenting. Did great. So Measure LV, just to give a little bit of overview on Measure LV, it was approved by voters in 2020, and it is used to maintain funding for general city services based on the guidelines that were passed by City Council. We have two tiers that we use for determining the expenditures. Tier 1 is used for salary and benefit increases, and Tier 2 is used for equipment and service enhancements. Measure LV does have a citizen oversight committee that reviews the revenues and expenditures throughout the year. In addition, as Isabella mentioned, we will be reviewing the anticipated revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 23-24 next week with the oversight committee. And it is the oversight committee's responsibility to review that and recommend to City Council how they think we should spend those funds. So it is a recommendation to City Council. So to go over some of the activity for Measure LV. For Measure LV, we need to, or the goal right now is to control that spending and make sure that it is sustainable for years to come. As you can see in, let's see if I can get this to work. So in year 25-26, the revenue is in green and your expenditures is in red. So at 25-20 or 26-27, those lines cross and your expenditures are going to outpace your revenues. And that's really not something that we want to have, as we want to make sure that we can make Measure LV last as long as possible. And so we do have this amount up here, which is your fund balance. So we do have that, and that is going to close that gap in the event that our revenues do not keep pace with our expenditures. But we are trying to look at ways to be more creative with our bargaining units so that we can try and control that spending. So now we are going to look at a high level of expenditures. So just like we did with our revenues, we are looking at a 5-year expenditure forecast. We have 3 different scenarios for you. We have a status quo, we have a preferred, and we have an ideal budget. And so what that is our status quo is really we look at the current year budget. So we look at 2023 or 22-23. And we look at what our current liabilities are as far as for personnel and our current contracts, so our existing contracts for services, and we look to see what our costs, what costs we have to pay. So there are going to be contracts that have increases built into them, and we have to cover those. So our status quo budget or status quo covers all of those costs. The preferred is going to include the status quo as well as the current requests for personnel that we have that you'll see later. And then the ideal budget is going to include the status quo as well as the personnel and the operational requests that departments have. So this is the 5-year forecast put together. So here you have your revenues and your expenditures together. So you have your status quo, your preferred, and your ideal. With the status quo budget, we are looking at having if it is how it stands today, we are estimating that we would have $360,000 of reserves. With the preferred budget, we would have to use $215,000 of reserves. And with the ideal budget, we would have to use 1.5 million in reserves. So if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go into the proposed budget.
How much total reserves do we have?
I-
You talked about how much they add or take away, but you didn't give the total balance.
Yep, I'm going to go right.
I knew you.
She's very happy, right?
I was leading you.
That's okay, that's okay. I appreciate the support. Okay, so here we have our general fund reserve balances. So in July of 2022, we started the year off at $12.6 million in reserves. We have added, our anticipated add at the end of June 2023 is $44.8 million of revenues or resources. Appropriations are anticipated at almost 5 million, with an anticipated estimated ending fund balance of a little over $12 million. So we have different classifications for fund balances. We have committed, which are amounts that are determined by formal action by City Council. So that is your fund balance policy, AR 216, that establishes that we have to have a 15% emergency contingency. So there you can see that there is a 15% contingency. That $7 million is 15% of the appropriations that we are anticipating for fiscal year 23-24. The 5% working capital reserve, which is also committed, is $2.3 million, also on the 23-24 appropriation amounts. The restricted funds are specific purposes, and those are restricted by legislation or external resources. So that's, we have SB 1186, which is a disability access education fee, which we collect with business license. That has to be collected, and it can only be spent for disability education. We also have donations that come in for events such as concerts in the park. So those can only be spent for concerts in the park. So $331,000 are restricted funds for those purposes. We lastly have assigned. Assigned is specific purpose which does not meet either committed or restricted. And we have benefit obligations of $1.9 million. And right now that is for the vacation and sick liability. So in the event that everybody decided to leave and we had to pay out that liability, we have 1.9 million set aside, which is about $500,000 less than what the liability is right now. But there's 1.9. And then the capital projects is normally $500,000, but if you remember, we received direction from you to use $171,000 for Lowell Brant Park playground. So that has reduced that capital projects number. Based on this, we are looking at using, or based on the 22-23 year end, we are looking at using about $619,000 from reserves. That is actually less than we had anticipated at mid-year, which was, I believe, $660,000. The majority of that is for prior year encumbrances, but we also had some police vehicles and partial funding for a police clerk. So here is our high-level overview of our proposed budget. So this looks at just the expenditures for 23-24, and this gives you again those three different scenarios. So you have your status quo, your preferred, and your ideal. You can see up there you have your revenue that is 48.2, and then, and I'd have to go back. If you remember, it was $360,000 if we ended up getting direction to go with the status quo budget and of surplus, $200,000 for reserves for the preferred, and 1.5 that would need to come from reserves for the ideal. So I'm going to hand it over to Ellie, who's going to talk about the personnel changes.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellie Elizabeth, but I like to go by Ellie. And I'll go on with the personnel. So as Isabella noted earlier in the budget process, one of the steps involves the personnel changes and requests from departments. So starting off with administration, which includes city manager, city clerk, personnel, finance, and information systems. The department identified 2 vacancies totaling $209,000. And they have identified also 1 FTE request, which would be a change from a part-time to a full-time position for a total of $68,000, but that would be offset by savings in not renewing the Tripepi contract. For community development, they have not identified any vacancies, but they did note 1 FTE request from a part-time to a full-time admin clerk, and they noted that it would provide adequate coverage for the front counter to the public. That would total $39,803. Police has identified 3 vacancies, 1 which would be a police clerk, 1 and 2 corporal positions, for a total of $433,000. And they have not identified any new requests or upgrades. Public Works has identified 9 vacancies, of which 5 are part-times, for a total of $610,000. And there are 2 new requests. 1 would be a part-time to a full-time, the admin clerk. And then there would be a customer service rep that would go under water. That would reestablish the water leak detector program and repair efforts. And that would amount to $127,537. For community services, there are no vacancies. However, there is 1 upgrade, no FTE additions, just an upgrade. That would be a community services manager to a community services director for a total of $28,528. And finally, fire. They have identified 1 vacancy for a fire engineer paramedic for a total of $187,054. And they also have requested 3 additional FTEs, 3 additional firefighters, for a total of $412,107. They noted that it would add a 4th person to Engine 2, and it would help meet their federal regulations. And I'll hand it back to Christy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, her first time presenting. I don't think they were super excited about having to present, but you guys did great. So. Okay, so what are the next steps from here? So the next steps is we do need feedback and direction from council regarding where we want to go, again, with that status quo, the preferred or the ideal. Just to kind of give you a review, the status quo is, it is what it is. It's the current year budget with the contractual increases. The preferred budget currently has the additional personnel requests that we have. And then the ideal budget has personnel and other operational requests that we have received from the departments. Staff will continue to develop the budget. It is a process. It's a living document right now. It may change. We're hoping that we got all of this, everything in there, but we are still looking through all of the numbers. And then we will return for the study session on June 5th, where the departments will present their budgets. And then we will have budget adoption on June 19th. So after that.
And Mr. Mayor, I want to thank Christy and her team for doing a lot this year. It's been a tremendous year because of, as we talked about, the current year budget, where we've been, where we're going. And then one of the things that Christy did is, staff presented for the first time, but staff also were liaison to the different departments for the first time to get a better understanding of each department budget. And the department had a true liaison within the finance department to talk to and interact with. So it's good for Christie's staff, it's good for our departments. One of the things we did 3 weeks ago with budget meetings in the city manager's office, each department basically sat down from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the department. Maybe Yvonne's was the shortest at maybe
I think
45 minutes,
maybe,
but
4 with Public Works.
yeah, public works was a little bit longer. But during
a little
that
bit
time, we went over all the requests that you've seen, looked at revenues, looked at expenditures, asked a lot of questions. There were no yeses, there were no nos at the time. What I prefaced every meeting was that I'm here to listen, I'm here to ask. We're all going to work as a group, and I'm not going to say yes to any of your requests. Ultimately, what I need to do is present to you a balanced budget, and that's my aim. And tonight, we do want some direction as far as where you're seeing. What Christy talked about, the changing nature, the living document, truly is. Even the last week, there's been changes. Today, we were talking about, some of the grant requests that we have into state appropriations, federal appropriations. All these things will help us, but we do have to plan for it. And we do have projects like you'll hear when Meg goes over the CIP. We're looking at doing things a little bit differently to make sure that we're on the spot, and that we actually accomplish what we're setting forth. In the year going forward, what I'd like to do is introduce a strategic planning or priority project setting session. Typically, that would go before a budget, so we would understand where the city council's priorities are for public infrastructure and other things like that. Incorporate that into the budget, and then bring you something that is more solid than probably what you've seen in the past. So, I think this next year is going to be a continual, I'm not going to say a learning, but it's going to be need for flexibility as we see where our true finances, how we are truly recovering from COVID, but also going into a professed minor, slight recession and how that impacts us. Also, how changes are coming through the state. We know that if we were Eastvale right now, the city of Eastvale, we'd probably be seeing about $44 million more in sales tax coming to us in the year because of the way state law is set up for the distribution facilities and the fulfillment centers, as they are called. That is not money that is just materializing and is being taken from other cities. So all of us will see a little less somewhat, and that's what you see in some of our projections. So every year that the state of California and the legislature pass bills and does stuff, it impacts us. And so we're always going to have to be watching that and constantly understanding what the impacts are to us. So, so I appreciate Christy and all her staff's attention to it, because it is, for a city our size, for the full services that we provide our residents, and for all that you try to do to make this a better community. I wish our revenue sources were a little bit deeper and broader, but I think we're all doing a really good job.
And full disclosure for anybody out there, you were referring to the online sales tax before, prior. The city used to receive if you lived here and bought from here. Now it's changed to more the distribution cities.
Yes, but it's also some of that would go to the county pool or the state pool, and that has changed. And there's still ongoing efforts to kind of bring technology into, when you point and click from your home computer and it's delivered to your front door, everybody knows where it's going to. We know it's 91750, but the state and their computer systems and their policies have not caught up to that yet. And then you're going to have winners and losers. So the cities that are gaining right now and have gained don't want to lose. But there's got to be fairness in the system. So that is something that groups of city managers and other folks are looking at, and we're going to constantly be working with our legislators to, bring that in.
We must always get our fair share. There's going to be a lot of changes, though. I mean, you look at the they don't even know what the deficit is in our state, which is really alarming to me. You know, we had a $100+ billion surplus, and now it was like a 37 maybe, and they're not sure because they extended the taxes, so we really have no idea. But I want to thank Christy and the staff. We're talking about this more than we ever have, and I think that's the most important thing, which is transparency, having study sessions and letting us know in the budget when the previous finance director left and there was just things in the wrong places, I guess I could say, you know, and that you came in and started to pull back the layers and just realizing, and like every week it was like, wait, oh no, wait, no, we've got this, we've got that, but that was good because I think everybody was always wondering, you know, over the years, where are we? You know, are our funds straight? Do we have the proper coding of our funds, especially our water and some of the other ones, you know, our CIP? But I'm very happy that we're doing this right now. I did have, I would like to see, I know we started to do more, our Measure LV committee. I would like to see personally that we, when they meet, I think it's the information that comes from them a little more vocal, maybe have one of them come with you to address what's going on and how we are with Measure LV. I know that we've got that curve and we're gonna reach the max of that soon, but the discretionary part and just the communication that we have with the Measure LV, I know that most of us really didn't know what was going on with it. It's been pretty quiet, but now it's pretty active, and I think it's important that we really get some information from them. As far as now, we probably, or should we open this up to public comment? I mean, does anybody have any questions right now for Christy? You want to open this up to public comment, and then we come back and discuss it some more? Mr. Johnson?
Was there a direction?
Well, that's what I think.
I think after, so basically, yeah, open it up to public comment, then bring it back to city council for discussions, for some more questions, and then there can be some direction provided. Mayor, you brought up the fact that, you know, the state had a huge surplus, potentially looking at a deficit, but they don't know. They did extend the property tax deadlines in the filing for all the sales tax and all that stuff. Personal income tax, sorry.
Right.
The biggest issue in the differences, so in the last 4 to 10 years, people would see the state with these surpluses. And then the cities were always saying, you know, we're cutting services, we don't have enough money. Really, it's two different streams of revenue that support the state versus the city. So the state is supported 80% by personal and corporate income tax, and we don't get any of that. And then they get a big chunk, as you saw, of property tax, and they get some sales tax also. So property tax and sales tax are our two primary largest sources. And then UUT, Measure LV now, which is an add-on sales and use tax. And then we have to provide, you know, charges for fees that cover some of the services and all that stuff, grants and all that stuff. So two different sources, and that's why, you know, we've always been very lean. That's why we're always concerned about the state passing new legislation that is an unfunded mandate, because they'll say, oh yeah, Prop 13 says we have to pay for it, but we're finding this is a statewide, and so we're not going to give you any funding to cover this mandate. And we see that mostly in, you know, trash issues and organics and all that other stuff, but it's in just about every bill where they're passing the buck onto the local levels. They're also coming in and with like housing issues, they're taking away the ability of, if they allow by right in a commercial complex for a residential unit to go into a retail providing area, you're potentially taking away that sales tax revenue from us. You're replacing it with residential. But again, that personal income tax and everything else goes to the state. So it is, again, tough to be a city, but with conservative leadership and education. And we're going to be looking at changing the budget book and providing more information in there, but also looking at things during the year to increase people's understanding of how we do business here. So,
Well, I think we've been doing that, and I appreciate that. My concern is the grant issues, is for going out to grants. Each of our higher electeds has certain discretionary funds that, and also the grant writing, as far as from the state or the federal. With deficits, that doesn't bode well for us when we're trying to write a grant when there's no money available. And I mean, that's the toughest thing for us is, but yes, and I appreciate that. I think we've done a great job, more than we've ever have, because we're all getting information almost on a monthly, if not before monthly basis, which is you know, the reconciliation, or basically our point in time with our budgets, which we never got before. And I think it's really important that we and also the community know where we're at any time to see where we have to do that. So, Mr.
I
Mayor Pro Tem.
have some questions, clarifying questions, and then public comment afterwards, but after the public comments. So I'll start from the very beginning. On slide 13, you talked about the sales tax breakdown. On the three, we all know Measure LV. Can you explain the Bradley Burns to our public as well, the 1% at all?
Bradley's
that they
Burns
know?
is just the state 1% that has been there for years, and the breakdown for that 10.25 is again 6% goes to the state of that 10.25. 2.5 goes to the county, which we do get back some of that through Prop A, Prop C, Measure R, and Measure M. However, when that comes back to us, it's based, if I'm correct, it's based on our population, right? So if, you know, we buy more gas here, it doesn't mean that we get more money through this Prop A, Prop C, Measure R, Measure M. And then the city gets that 1.75%, and 0.75 is the Measure LV, obviously, but the Bradley Burns is just, I believe it's the law, and that's just what they
Historically,
called it. That's
that's the
who,
name.
I think,
Those were
who
the two
sponsored it.
legislators who sponsored
Yeah.
the legislation, so kind of like Mello Roos and everything else, so.
I just want to make sure that people out there
No,
heard
of
that
course,
as
no
well, so I
problem.
appreciate that. And then on our general fund balances, it was on 19. We talked about the reserve. So the estimated ending fund balance on 6/30/2023, the 12,025,000. You to find out what percentage of ending fund balance we have, you divide that by our total amount of expenditures, which would be the appropriations. So I take that as we're at 26.4%.
I'll trust you on that. I'd have to do it. But yeah.
So, which was a reduction before the additional appropriations. If you did it just from the resources at 44, it was at 27.8% when we then added down the rest. I know since I've been on there, it's been above that. The highest we got to was almost 30, and just want to make sure that we are trying to keep our reserves as high as possible. So
Yes, that is the goal, is to increase the reserves. As our expenses increase, our reserves are also going to increase, because that is what we use to determine that amount. So we take our appropriations and multiply it by that 15%. And so just for an example, we are taking on, which we're getting back in revenue, but we're taking on $1 million for asset forfeiture that we're going to pre-fund, so that is increasing our reserves here. So we are getting those revenues back. It's not going to cost us anything. However, that does increase our fund balance. So as those revenue or expenses increase, then our reserves increase.
and the last piece, thank you, on 21 with the personnel changes. When we have vacancies, not in police or fire or public works, because they have to be covered through overtime and to get things fixed. But then if we have vacancies like in administration, if those vacancies are not filled, then those times aren't covered by overtime, or are they?
No, so it depends on the position,
Yeah.
obviously. So, for example, one of the vacancies in administration is the senior accountant. So we're currently recruiting for that. But no, there's no overtime that's going to cover those positions. We include this because it is something that we could look at holding in the event that it came to that, or looking to see maybe the senior accountant isn't going to be funded until, or isn't going to be hired until January. So we would have a little bit of savings that maybe we could use for one-time expenses, not ongoing, but maybe we could use it and shift those expenses or those sources to one time.
We never feed people with one-time money.
No.
Yeah, no. A good example of that also is in our information technology, we do have a vacant position, but we've been using the salary savings for a contract to provide support. So, yeah, we look at everything like that and how's it going to affect us? Do we delay recruitment? Do we fill it real quick because it's absolutely a needed position? So anytime there is a vacancy, the direction to the department director is to, look at that position, what was it providing, what is it responsible for, and then can you reorg your department for more efficiencies or effectiveness, or do we just go ahead and recruit real quick?
And the requests for upgrades or for new people, those would be the in the preferred budget if those were granted.
Correct, and we would obviously need to get you a listing of those, but it varies from one-time needs to, an increase in a contract. So I'm just using this as an example, not that we have this, but if we wanted to trim our trees instead of every 5 years, 6 years, or 4 years, right? So then we're gonna look to increase that contract and change it. So it's things like that the departments are requesting, that we would have to give you a list of.
But with like the public works or the fire, those aren't contracts, those are people. So
Right.
those are more
Exactly.
ongoing.
Yes,
Oh,
yes, those would be
yeah.
ongoing, correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions before we go to public comment? We're gonna open up public comment right now. Anybody wish to address on this subject to our finance director or Ms. Beauchamp?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I want to thank Christy. This is one of the best presentations I've seen regarding finance. The graphs and the explanation is very self-explanatory. It's very easy to understand, even if you're not a financial professional. With all of this said, and the fact that the Measure LV money will be capping out at the 2026 year, I think the council needs to reconsider some of the things that they were interested in. The presentation we had a few meetings ago for the electric charging stations in the downtown area, and the AQ&D gentleman that did his presentation. Those projects, I know the cities like to go forward in terms of green and energy conservation, but at the expense that it would cost, that would be making these numbers go even further into the negative. So I think that's something that this council needs to reconsider going forward. Also, when it comes time for the department heads to present their budgets, I just wonder if when it comes to police and fire, if there's any kind of savings that can be presented in terms of equipment. For example, we have the mutuality agreement with LA County Fire. Because they're such a much larger agency, the truck that we purchased to exceed a 3rd-story building now, is there, if this housing project comes in at a 5-story, then what are we doing? We have to kind of think way in advance. It can't just be in this 5-year period. So I think these are things that the council needs to seriously consider going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beauchamp. Anyone else wish to speak on this item? Come on up, Mr. Bowen.
Mr. Mayor, Council, City Manager, you guys did a great job. Thank you this year, finally. Curious, a lot of our contracts, if I remember right, are tied to CPI. And so are those figures in the Fed CPI that we know what the contracts will go up automatically? Do we have that number yet?
Yeah. You want to wait till Rick, why don't we wait till he's done with his comments and then we'll just answer them.
Okay, and if I remember right, a couple of years ago, with the extension of the waste management, 10-year extension, no bid contract, you changed from CPI, the CPI I just asked about, to some waste CPI. So is that going to be significantly different? Do we know what that is? In other words, in answer to my first question, let's say the Fed CPI is 4%. Could the waste management one be 8%? Do we know?
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. You got another one?
I got more.
Okay.
I guess what I'm asking you, will we have those answers?
She's got it.
Okay.
She's ready.
Cool,
now.
thanks. Also, I noticed that on the slide 9, the taxes, obviously, everything's, it's kind of hard to tell because they're, just little lines. But there's one of the biggest revenue pieces is the transfer in. Transfer in from where? They seem to be the biggest chunk in growth, quite frankly, other than the taxes, which we know a lot are coming from LV, the measure LV. It's slide number 9, the 5-year revenue forecast. If you go to the top, again, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it appears that the top segment is the fastest growing, and it says transfers in. Am I reading that right? Right there? The top layer is transfer in, according to the legend. Transfer somewhere.
Yeah, and Chrissy can answer that for you when
Okay.
we're done.
And lastly, is the measure LV money. I think I went to that meeting. I think there's 8,200,000 projected to be in that, I think, starting July. And last year, I think 120,000 was allocated in the tier 2. And if I remember right, Christie said, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that anticipated being about the same amount, $120,000. So when you talk about citizens oversight, you're talking 240,000 out of 8.2 million. So I don't know if those figures are wrong or not, but it seems like the tier 2 oversight is so minimal. And I don't believe a lot of the citizens thought that was what the measure was for, thought there was more things built into that measure. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
And before Chrissy starts, and I'm sure she'll talk about CPI, but there are multiple different CPIs to look at. And even when you look at if a CPI is based in September, it could be different than what the CPI is in October. And so that's where in contracts say you want to set it so it's not floating all around and all that stuff. But Christy?
Correct. So the status quo budget does take into account any required contract increases. So if CPI is one of those increases, the departments review all of their contracts and they give us the information and tell us what the increase is going to be. And so we do include that in the status quo. As far as the waste management, I'm not, it varies based on the contract. It depends on the contract. So there's quite a few different contracts. I don't have what the increase is. And like Ken said, it depends on the month. So if you pull the CPI down in October over a year, it's going to be different than if you pull it down in March.
Yeah.
So it just varies. And in the contract, it lists what month you have to pull it down for.
Yeah. And that's a piece of information that we're, happy to get, because it's in the agreement that when we bring the annual agreements to the council, any other agreement, we can highlight that. And on the annual agreement process, that's something that I do want to look at, but don't have time right now to change it up for the one that's coming forward soon. But that is certainly, once we're through the budget process, start looking at that annual agreement process and reconfigure things there.
I think that's important we do that because that is definitely a cost factor. CPI could be different and tied to something else. As Mr. Bowen stated, the waste management contract was it was a strange when they extended it. It had to do with a waste CPI, and it was like, what are we talking about? It's kind of confusing. So I think if we go through and
Yeah, that was, industry, I know we have waste management here. I've worked for CR&R and Republic Cities, and all of them have switched to that because it incorporates different things with their trucks and other stuff like that, and landfill costs. Yeah, we can look at, one of the things we're trying to do in the budget is, again, educate people, and if we can't get it into the budget, we could always look at, talking about the CPI process and getting some information. One of the best, it's a very ugly website, but www.californiacityfinance.com has wonderful information. If you're a finance dork, you go on there, and Michael does a great job of just, calling it what it is, Christie.
Finance director, what?
So, but it talks about Bradley Burns sales tax and everything else, and so it's got just tons of information. Bradley Burns was initiated in 1956, by the way. There's a lot more education we can do, and we look forward to doing that.
Great. Continue.
I'm not sure what the percentage is for waste management. I don't know if you have that, or do you?
No, I would say that the waste management contract will incorporate not only the adjustments, but also potential for green waste. We have not seen those numbers from them, but we're fairly certain in San Dimas, and their negotiations are a little further ahead. I believe they're asking for 10%. So we have not seen any of the details, and we will obviously be bringing that forward to council once we do.
I do remember when we were doing that contract, which I don't care for long-term contracts, and I believe in competitive contracts, but it was a gray area. They couldn't say it because of organics and green. And they said, this is going to, their exact words were, if I'm not mistaken, correct me guys that were here, this is going to change. And it's going to be, I think they said even it's going to be ugly.
So
And it's like
10% increase in waste?
I'm saying I don't know yet. That's what I believe San
Well-
Dimas's latest negotiations are, and it's based on the organics changes that the state did without implementing any infrastructure to really have a place to take the waste. And so it's really, it'll be interesting to see the detailed information from Waste Management and to see where we go from there.
That's why we take it to Tulare. Well, not right now though, because you can't, because it's flooded.
Yeah.
It's Lake Tulare,
Yes.
which is growing. But anyway, thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay, so the next question was in regards to the transfers in. So in the budget book, at the end of, there's a section at the end of the finance section, there is a listing of all of the transfers. So it does identify the individual transfers, where they're coming from, what they're for, and it's various. So again, I mentioned the asset forfeiture. So this year we do have a transfer in to cover that asset forfeiture expenditure. We also have the overhead costs for water and sewer. We have CFD 90-1. So there's a lot of different transfers that do come in, and they are all listed out in the budget.
And the largest increase probably seeing that is, because we did not have Measure LV before 2020. So as that grows in its utilization, that's a transfer into the general fund budget.
Correct, that is also a transfer.
So,
Yes, Measure LV is in its own fund. It is general fund, but it's in its own fund, so we do have to transfer that into the general fund. The last one was Measure LV. The $8 million that Mr. Bone was referring to, and I don't have that number right now, but I believe he was referring to the reserve balance, and I'm pretty sure that that's what it was. And that is correct. We do have $120,000 currently that is identified for Tier 2 expenses. Now, in the event that the council wanted to suggest that we change that, then that is definitely something that we could do. We can provide them with the list of the department requests that we have right now and see if there's any one time that maybe the committee would like to support that the departments are currently requesting. In the past, how it has been done, from what I understand, is that the city manager would go to the departments and say, what are you looking for? What are your needs? Do you need any additional services? Do you need equipment? then that would be taken to Measure LV committee. They would review that, and then they would recommend to council that they think that they should be using tier 2 funds to purchase these items. So that is typically how it has happened, and that is how, from what I understand, the guidelines are written for that.
I think Mr. Bowen was also talking about the fact that we were thinking that tier 2 would be a larger amount for other things in the community. Obviously, labor and benefits and everything else are going up, and then adding employees. But I think that's what he's referring to. It's $120,000, which is not a lot considering what we're taking in, but it's being used for most of what it was called for, but thinking that maybe we should add more for the community to be able to do other things.
Right, and what has happened is because we have Measure LV, the general fund is able to support those additional services. General fund is able to support the additional senior accountant, and it's able to support the additional account clerk and the deputy fire chief and the CRR and the additional equipment that we've had and the additional services, the AOs that have shifted. So those are additional things that the general fund is now picking up, and the only reason that the general fund can do that is because of Measure LV. So yes, Measure LV isn't specifically paying for those additional services. However, they are in a roundabout way, because we would not be able to do what we're doing with the general fund if we did not have Measure LV. We would be in a major hurt right now.
Well, not that the AO program is one of the most successful too, besides all the other items, but it does bring in revenue, and I think that's very, very important. And we have an ambulance service that we lend out to other people at a cost, obviously. Yes.
It does, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Any other public comments? Anybody on the screen? Oh, not on the screen. Never mind. Thank you, Christy. With that, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the dais. Questions,
Yeah, and-
comments for staff?
I just have a
So
question
wait.
as we're talking, but go ahead.
Just a second.
No.
Well, we still need to review the CIP.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Well-
before we move on.
My favorite
Wait,
topic.
Come on up. I
Yes,
was- yeah,
sir.
I didn't see it, but yeah. We don't want to forget that. That's kind
No,
of
we
important.
don't. Yes.
Really important.
Good evening. So basically, the capital improvement program, as you all know, it's rehabilitation, replacement, or new infrastructure. It's basically a 5-year planning tool with essentially the 1 year of funding that's a request from City Council. So and this is, you all know this, but their funding sources vary. General fund is the least restrictive fund, and because it funds all of our other services, there typically is not a lot of that to go towards parks and other things. We do have approximately $250,000 that gets transferred into our capital outlay fund for miscellaneous projects. And then we have the restricted revenues and sources, which is essentially they have to be utilized for specific purposes. So we have the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, which we know was developed for basically to encourage development around the Gold Line. And with that development, it's the infrastructure necessary to spur that development with the goal to ultimately have it bring in more property tax and enable the city to provide additional services. Then we have park development fees, which are developer impact fees that help us improve parks. We have sewer, which are from sewer water. They're all ratepayer funded for specific system improvements. We have the transportation funds that the finance team discussed, Prop A, Prop C, Measure M, Measure R. Those are all very specific purposes. And then we also have some grants and some earmarks, although with the state's current fiscal, we don't anticipate getting a lot this year. These are the fiscal year 22-23 approved projects, and I would like to recognize not only the Public Works team in kind of working through this process, but also finance and every other department that answers all my questions and helps me understand these projects a little bit further. But this is essentially information on the status of these current projects, because this is our starting point. These are the priorities that council has already identified, and so we're looking at what the funding are related to these and also where they are. So the first one is the pavement management program, and the Price Hayes neighborhood is currently in design. The sidewalk rehabilitation is basically in design. It's citywide. Traffic 6 and sorry, 6ND crosswalk.
I did shower.
6ND crosswalk. We're actually talking to the COG because it's a rapid flashing beacon that gets installed, but you're not allowed to leave it in permanently. So we're talking to them about how to approach that project. Arrow Highway is an urban greening grant, which is essentially the eastern corridor of the city, but a lot of it is in the city of Pomona. We're working with them. It's a landscaping project in the medians. We think it'll come in over budget, meaning we need additional funding for it, so we'll be talking to Pomona about that. Then next is the EIFD. You all see on East Street and 2nd the improvements that are being made. We're really excited about the enhancements, not only the walking, it's the inviting people from the Gold Line to our downtown area. We have the pedestrian bridge, the initial phase, which is the design. We're close to completion of that design. The Fire Station 1 room addition, which is essentially for ADA compliance. We're in scope review right now, public safety security fencing. We're also in scope review and looking at how exactly to do that. We have the exterior parking lights. We're looking at how to phase that project and what we should do, again in scope review. EV charging. So this, as you know, we've had requirements for the infrastructure for all of our fleet to essentially become EV. So we are looking at a master plan of that site to determine exactly how we place the infrastructure and what we do there with our fleet. Downtown tree lighting, phase 1, we're doing a scope review. This is essentially taking the tree lights that are out and expanding it out further into the community. It will take electrical drops as well as irrigation, so it will be significant and costly, and we're looking at that. We also have the Monero Square, which is essentially completed, and you may have seen the exciting fountain on recently, so we're excited about that. We're in the final punch list items. The Aquatic Center, we have bid it previously, and because we're working to make sure that we stayed within kind of working around the schedules of our partner agencies, the bids came in higher than we could afford, and so we're rescoping and rebidding that project, hoping to have a slightly lower cost, but we still anticipate the need for additional funds. Then we have the Los Flores shade structures, and again, it's a contract is awarded. Los Flores restroom south, we believe that with the utilities and other drainage needs there, that we're going to need additional funding for those projects as well. The scope review is underway for the tennis court surfacing and lighting. The Lowell Brandt playground equipment, it's been awarded. And then we have the Lowell Brandt basketball court lighting, which bids are in process. And the annual sewer and water line, that's almost a placeholder. Then we have the Plateau Summit water line, and this is definitely a priority for us. We were out on site looking at the challenges of that particular installation, but we do believe that we have enough funding for that. And then the Live Oak generator is currently underway in terms of scoping. NPDES was an implementation project in the amount of $350,000. So essentially, from a CIP project prioritization, the first thing is to look at the projects that we have in hand and look at the additional needs that we have with them. So we're reviewing that. So with Arrow Highway, we believe that we will need additional funding. With the Aquatic Center, we believe we'll need up to $800,000. Now we partner with ULB as well as Bonita Unified for that project, but for us, we'll also need to upfront that money. The Los Flores Park South restrooms, we believe will need another $480,000. The final stormwater project, it was previously funded with sewer money as well as general fund. We believe that it should come from Measure W, and also we want to do a kind of a master planning effort to make sure we're spending that money wisely. So we're planning on defunding that project, redirecting that money into general fund and also sewer. So that's kind of our first phase of prioritization, is looking at what's on the docket and looking at where we need to go.
So, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The aquatic center pool, that's an $800,000 additional to the other $800,000?
We believe it'll be about a 1.5, so each partner will share $500,000. Now separately, we are working to potentially get an earmark, so Ken could maybe speak to that.
Well, and part of that also is that we're fronting the money, and then it's a reimbursement. So we have to have the money in order to expend it, and then we'll get reimbursed by the two other entities. But we do have several grant and appropriation requests in for helping out all three. And the partnership between Bonita Unified, ULV and us is one of the reasons why they looked at it and said, oh, it's not just one city, it's a regional partnership that is doing this. So we're hopeful, but that's the bird in the bush, and if we have a bird in the hand, then we have to plan for that.
The Arrow Highway project, does that
Yes.
include repaving?
It does not. So when we're looking at future planning, that's one of the things we're talking about. What are the major streets that need to be, we're gonna need some significant investment dollars in, and so how do we start setting them aside in terms of our annual pavement programs? And that's essentially the next process. So these charts just show you, the bottom chart on the left was just the ARPA prioritization that already occurred with council. And then on the right, those are some of the projects that we're looking to potentially propose next year. But really, again, working with finance and just Christy, thank you so much, to determine how much money we have in each one of these, not only restricted, but also general fund, to bring back a plan for you. And the goal is to bring back that plan on June 5th to prioritize the projects and also show you the funding sources that we have available to us.
All right, okay, I got my question now. So I'm sure I'm interrupt the process here. I have the question about Metro Gold Line. Thank you for answering that, but I want to know, is there any way we can look into like requests for proposals from the Metro Gold Line to see if there's any services that we can provide? For example, any of the security aspect of it for the public safety, we can request it through Metro Gold Line in order to get funding for that. Is that something that we can do? Is that in your shop? Or?
Are you talking about the future project
Yes.
and future security? That's something that we haven't talked. I know that the project itself, we've already looked at the mitigation factors, so the project itself is pretty much set in terms of the betterment money that they'll give us, as well as any kind of infrastructure improvements they'll make. But in the long term, once they open, we haven't had those discussions as far as I know, but I'm certain we're open
No,
to
and
discussing
again,
that.
with the Gold Line is the construction authority, so there's gonna be a point in
Metro.
time where they are done and they turn it over to Metro. Metro, and speaking to them, they, and you're talking about security and the concerns that there are for having it, they are completely revamping. They have a new chief, I believe it's Gina Osborne, former FBI agent. They're looking at, they currently have 3 contracts, LAPD, LA County Sheriff, and then I believe Long Beach PD. One of the things that they may be looking at is whether they create their own internal enforcement, public safety. And they are doing a lot of other changes. So I don't think we'd have the opportunity to compete for something like that, but we are definitely talking to them. We had a online virtual meeting with her and ULV and Acting Chief Gonzalez about 2-3 weeks ago to talk about, what's forthcoming and what are some of the security concerns of all of us here. So.
Because I know they went back and forth as far as the different contracts that they had, and they had a request for proposals that they wanted to get some of the other local cities to have that patrol aspect of it, and they were going to fund it and give some money. And now talking about, because they have their own security force, they just have minimized it tremendously over the years. So I don't know if they're going to, after all the incidents that they've had on the Metro Gold Line, that they're talking about bringing them back in some higher capacity. But I was just thinking more about our community and our safety and our officers and our fire department that's going to have to respond to that. So if we could just have that continued discussion
Absolutely,
with them,
yeah.
please.
I do know that they're
One way or
looking
another.
at going from 48 to 52 transit security officers. So they are looking at doubling the size of the force, which is a great thing. But absolutely, anything that we can partner with them, anything that we can get from them, that's always at the top of our list.
I'll keep my ear out for sure. That's something we're looking forward to.
Well, I also, the issue is that it's unsafe.
Oh, it's horrible.
And the problem is when it comes to Laverne, if they don't address these, it's still unsafe. And there's a lot of pressure being to bear on Metro right now, and because everything they're doing at this point is really not working. Whether they do their own private police, whether they continue their contracts with some of the other ones, it's needless to say, you go to the paper and almost every week there's something happening, and it's not good. And so in answer to your question, we hope within the next year, because 2025, that thing's gonna be open, and the thing is that this needs to be addressed now, and I think a lot of the cities are extremely frustrated because, especially the cities that are stopping, Azusa, Monrovia, Arcadia, and the line all the way up, and also internally in LA, some of the other stations where the unfortunate stabbing happened was that one was, I think it was the A line or whatever it was, but this needs to change, and they're getting a lot of heat, because it's not working. I know they have the ambassadors, but the situation is that they need to clean these up because people aren't riding because they're scared. And the stuff that's going on those trains, any of us do that, we'd be arrested. Sad reality, and they need to change. And they know that. Yeah, they know that. And it's part of the gold line, and they're very vocal about it. So, anyway.
So, Meg, as far as community development block grants, it seems like we never are able to spend what we receive.
Right.
Are there projects that you have in mind that we can use those funds?
So I have been talking to community development about it. I would like to see us move towards an ADA transition plan. So basically utilizing over the next probably 3 years, phasing in an ADA where they look at all of our facilities. So I've already discussed that. And then also potentially increasing our sidewalk and ramping that we do, again, to encourage accessibility. We're also talking about how do we do master planning efforts of like the park that would help us then identify how can these monies be redirected, because basically path of travel is a really good use for these funds.
I just hate to see us get pennies on the dollar.
Yes.
By selling them to another city that does more projects. I'd rather have those projects stay in Laverne.
Yeah.
I do like 100% of money coming to us.
Yeah, and on that, so the CDBG we wouldn't allocate, we're building it up, but what we face there is what it's called drawdown. Basically, they want you to spend the money within a certain amount of time. So we are identifying projects. In fact, on the May 15th meeting, we're coming back with an amount for use of CDBG funds, and then shortly thereafter we'll have a second tranche that will take a good portion of what we've built up. The other thing that we're doing is looking at all our funds. Like in the past, you talked about making sure that we have the right funding for things. You know, a couple of years ago with Measure LV, we bought some e-bikes for the police department. Great purchase, but we could have used the AB 2766 funds instead of Measure LV and kept that for other things. So making sure that we better understand the funding sources that we have. And then on Measure A, I think that's what we've in the past have sold. We're not doing that. So we will find projects that keep 100% of those funds here.
I think that's when you were talking about, Councilmember Johnson, was the Measure A funds that we're swapping for 3/4, but it's the CDBG money that we can't, we're trying to use it, we keep it, but we're trying to use it, but we need to earmark it for something that we can. That's really good. I know ADA is one of the biggest ones that we've been talking about, but we need to do it as quickly as we possibly can to get approval for that. You know?
Yeah, whether it's CDGB or
It
the
doesn't
Measure
matter.
A or
It's
whatever,
all-
I just like to
Use what we get.
be able to use that funding.
Agreed. Yes.
Okay. That's it. So I'll be bringing that prioritization list back to you on June 5th.
We're going to open up public comment on this item for the CIP. If anybody have any questions or comments for our Director McWade. Ms. Beauchamp.
I'm concerned with the population that the Gold Line will be bringing into our city. The city is literally rolling out a red carpet and directing them to the downtown area in Monero Square with the landscape redevelopment, the lighting, the trees. Why are we spending this money? I know the objective was to appeal to potential students and people that will be utilizing university services and education, but we have to be realistic in our expectations and use the statistic and the data that's provided by other cities that have already experienced dealing with Gold Line population. And we see what is happening right now with the Blue Line, where it ends in Long Beach. They are forced off the trains, and they're committing these burglaries and thefts and just mayhem in the Long Beach area. I'm very good friends with a detective for Long Beach Police Department, and she says the crime is growing exponentially. So until those funds, additional funds to extend the Gold Line to other cities, Pomona Laverne will be the end of the line. And we're literally going to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to just come right into downtown, and we're gonna open the door and lead them to the businesses that support our city. And at what cost? Some of these businesses will not be able to stay in business because they're gonna have to deal with vandalism and, other issues. And so I think that money could be better utilized elsewhere. It's unfortunate, but it's the cards that were dealt. You decided to have that station in our city, and I think that is something that really needs to seriously be considered. I mean, I'll tell you that statistic that Chief Flores presented to us, and she said she spoke to the Chief of Police of City of Arcadia. Once they opened their station, they had a 400% increase into their phone calls to their police department. So I'm sure those are going to be the numbers that our department is going to have to deal with. If not, other services, the host program, and maybe the fire department as well. For medical, drug overdoses and whatnot. So I really think that, yes, we all want our city to look wonderful, and it does. It can always be better, but we're spending this money going to be for homeless, drug addicts, mentally unstable people that will be coming in on this gold line. So I really wish that the city would reconsider that. Also, that $800,000, why is it on the aquatic center? Why are we fronting the money, especially if the university is using it just as much as the high school? I don't understand why that money can't be provided all at the same time to be paid, or be paid up front just like Laverne and earn some interest on it somehow until the project is actually completed. So those are my two biggest questions and concerns about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Beauchamp. Anyone else on public comment on this? We'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back up to the dais. Did you want to, Ms. Beauchamp, your point about the situation once the train comes in, yes. Well noted, and we have to address that. Metro needs to address it right now. They need to address it quickly, because no matter what they've tried, it's not working. And it needs to be a police action to be able to take those people and put them somewhere where they're safe and keep them off the trains. So, as far as the other issue with the $800,000, I think we explained that, but you want to clarify that as far as what we're fronting the money for the...
Yeah, we're contracting, so it's not that we're going to be fronting the money for a long time. When we get the bids back, then we'll work on agreements for, is it 60 days after we get a receipt and divide it up. So we'll work on all those details at that point, so.
Okay. Thank you. With that, council, any comments or questions, or do you want to move to direction for our finance director and our city manager? I guess we have three options, is that correct?
The options are endless, but
Finances are good.
yeah.
We have three at this point.
Yeah, as general direction, but understanding that, I will be bringing back a balanced budget. But just want to get your understanding of where you want to see things go. And then at the June 5th meeting will really be where you can, you're going to hear from the departments, you're going to hear from reason why they may want something. And then it'll be the June 19th, which is kind of the final blessing. And that's where it will be a balanced budget based on direction, more specific direction given there, because I may have an idea about one of the departments, but it may be a priority. So, we'll get better direction at that point. So the three decisions that are here, the status quo, preferred, and ideal are just three different names for, as is, high, low. So whatever comments.
That really didn't help.
I know. I'm sorry. I wish I had more money to help you.
Well,
Come on up, Christy.
I think what we want to do is we want to wait till our budget comes and we see what the requests are from all of our different departments. That, obviously we'd like to fund everything, and we would like to, I'm speaking for council, but we would like to fund everything, but I think we really need to see the budget and the requests and what the requests are.
This is not the final decision.
No, it's just but direction from us. No, it's not. No.
And so I would make a motion that we go with the preferred option at this point in time, and then let finance and the city manager come back to us and make whatever changes are necessary to keep us in the black.
Right, and at the time when the departments come back, they will give you, good reason and explanation as to why they need the additional requests that they are asking for. And obviously that is up to council. So we are just giving you an overview of where we are at this point, so that you aren't surprised with, the $1.5 million of reserve asks.
And that's what my concerns, when I first got on city council, our reserves were about 29%. And if now we're saying like 26.5%, that we've been digging in. And I believe we dig in reserves when we have a rainy day. We had some rainy days through COVID and to get there. So I understand the spending, but we need to go back to making sure that we're building those. And that because the next rainy day comes faster. When we get that water line that's going up the hill and it breaks, it's going to cost us a lot. And we need to make sure that we have the money for it. So my stance would be trying to build the reserves and maintain the great things we do for the city, because we do a lot of excellent things for our city.
So my comments on this would be, first, thank you for going through this process, for pulling everything together. Thank you to the department heads for participating in this process. I think that knowing the whole picture and having a little bit more clarity in how things are, I think gives perspective to the different departments as well as when they're asking for money, because then it's not just a siloed ask, right? It's understanding what part does that play in the big picture, and that's what I would hope that the department heads would continue to do as they're looking, that they're not just looking out for their own unit, but really partnering with their liaisons and understanding what is the bigger picture and what is my role in it. Because at the end of the day, we have to run an entire city, not just one department over another. I think my other comment would be, obviously these are all facts and figures that we're looking at that are subject to change, based on different information that may come in. I would say as a reminder to also look at the other factors that may not be calculable by sheer numbers, right? As Councilmember Johnson indicated, we'd love to try to move to that preferred route. And I think that's because in my mind, it takes into account what are the things that may affect maybe someone leaving the city, because attrition in terms of our employees costs us money. So to what end can we make sure that we're making the environment one where we continue that continuity in service without having to constantly think about, oh gosh, how do we backfill this position or how do we do that? So I would just urge as we proceed with this process that we keep those things in mind and that the departments continue to work with each other and really understand that we're all part of one team and that we need to make sure that the whole team wins and it's not just one over another. But that would be my ask. And then obviously to the points that the city manager made earlier is making sure that we're using money from the right budgets to pay for the right things. So if we've got funds allocated for a certain limited area, that those funds get expended. And again, to Councilmember Johnson's points that we're using money and we're not leaving any on the table. So
Yes, we have no revenues to sell at all for Prop A at all this year.
Okay.
It's not in there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Cash, comments?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, City Council and our staff for putting this all together. Really appreciate it. I'm a public safety guy. That's what I believe in wholeheartedly. I love to see. Hopefully, we can make this work later down the line. Because without people feeling safe in our community, our businesses are not going to be able to thrive. Our community is not going to be able to get out there and really have these great events that we've had recently, such as the wine walk, which I really loved, and also attending at the park. So for me, I'd like to see an increase in our public safety for our police and our fire. And if we can figure out a way, I will help any way I can. Believe me. But I'll leave that up to you as professionals, and we'll see what the May budget revised comes from the state and how that's going to affect all of us. But ultimately, for me, is our public safety and our public works as well as part of that to get a really strong focus on how we can increase that, because I know we're going to have people retire, and Councilmember Lau did mention that we are going to have an attrition, and so looking to that and seeing, because we don't know, somebody could retire tomorrow in our public safety, and then now we have another vacancy. So for me, if we could just focus on that as well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate all the departments and finance directors and also the our new Public Works Director, Meg McQuaid. I think too, we want to review our contracts too to see if there's money savings there also. And I think we're doing that currently, looking at all our contracts, our long-term contracts, contracts we've had with the city for a long time that we do need review. And I think that's looking at those to make sure we're getting our, due diligence and making sure that our residents are, getting the best cluck for their buck, as they say. But also, I just want to make sure that, like you say, and like everyone said, I think everyone works together, figure out what they need, figure out if some departments don't need certain things, we push it in the other departments. And I think you're bringing up that teamwork. Everybody seems to be working cohesively with the new city manager, and I think that's extremely important. So I think a budget just needs to be something that's realistic, but also we need to fill those gaps if we need people, and it's going to make us more efficient for the city and give better services to our community. That's what we want. But at the end of the day, we have to be conservative. We've always been conservative. I think that's very important. And to note to Mayor Pro Tem Crosby, reserves are important, and we try to keep those. And I know we've had some fluctuations and some changes. We've got ARPA funds, but they're not coming back again. We'll never see those again. That's a one-time deal that we will never see that again. Able to give money out to our residents, to our businesses. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, because that's just catastrophic. So with that, Councilmember Johnson does have a motion. Do we need to make a motion or just direction?
Just direction.
I
Yep.
think.
Okay.
I think you've got direction. Just,
do.
bring us
Thank you.
back with, they're going to save $200 million. And then we'll move to that. No, just,
Thank you.
You've been doing a great job, and I think everybody's working really well together, really appreciative of that. Just come back with realistic stuff and see if we can hammer it out,
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Christy. Appreciate it. They did. Everyone did a fantastic job. We really appreciate the information. We've never had this before. And you guys did. You knocked it out of the park. So thank you very much. And our new Public Works Director also. We almost skipped the CIP, which is very important. So
That's why I wanted to bring it back. So, Mr. Mayor, at this time, we would recess this special meeting, which is the closed session. We will reconvene for our regular meeting at 6:30 PM.
then this meeting right now, our study session is adjourned till 6:30 p.m.